back at it.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, episode 2.
Episode
Welcome.
2, Sonic Truth.
Sonic Truth, nothing but gear talk with Tommy 2002. Tommy 2002, where are you? There. Now, I tell you, Tommy would love to go through some reverb.
Oh, yeah. I know. We probably should have put him through some reverb for this episode, you know?
Maybe we'll do it next time around.
Yeah.
But he has to earn that because, you know,
yeah,
Tommy's been a little lately.
Yeah.
So that brings us up to, last episode we kind of, briefly reviewed compressors. I know we didn't go into too much everything. I think we missed, the FET compressor. We briefly covered. I mean,
we talked about the first product we ever did as a company, and now we're talking about the last
most recent product. And don't worry,
yin and the yang.
My audiophile friends, we'll get deeper into these units the more this podcast grows. So just be patient with us. But yeah, man, I'm super excited to hear about the Reverb. I know it was released on Halloween this past year.
Yep.
And, the time leading up to that, there was a lot of it. There was a certain buzz here, amongst all the workers. And just because it's been something you guys, how long has it been in development?
It's been in development since 2018.
Ooh.
So, there was a buzz, within our, our customer base, our, the whole Audioscape family, from everyone that works here, and our loyal supporters, which we're very grateful for. And
how did that come about? When I first used it, when you asked me to test it out 2 weeks ago, and I plugged in some of the work that I've been working on musically, and I'll tell you, man, holy shit. Well, first and foremost, there is no reverb plugin that can come close to what this offers.
Well, stereo, anything stereo.
That on your back, but the unit is pretty badass.
Oh, no, thanks. I mean, honestly, anything stereo, I feel like when you have a stereo effect, a lot of times it's really hard to capture that in a digital format. But there's, it's just the way the stereo field is dispersed in an analog unit versus digital.
Ones and zeros.
For me, But anyways.
We'll get in. That's
we won't,
we'll get into.
I'm sure there's people that'll disagree, but that's cool. Anyways, the product itself started in 2018. At the time, everything born out of necessity. I was really having a hard time getting audio transformers. I'm like, what can I start working on that doesn't use audio transformers? That was the basic question. And I was like, and I just started like looking around at different products and reverbs I came onto. I was like, that'd be really cool, and I ran into a thread on a forum back then, and there was this guy who was trying to reboot this old reverb that he had designed back, in the late 70s, early 80s area. And he'd been trying, it looked like for like 10 years, he'd been posting about this. And I was like, wow. I reached out and, inquired some more just about the design, just out of, morbid curiosity. And he started describing what the spring assembly was, how it's driven, all the features. And I was just blown away. And, he just started me down this path that, it finally got released, nearly, 4 years later.
Well, what's crazy is you mentioned spring, right? And the first time I heard it, it almost sounded like I was in a gymnasium. I could be in a chamber. I could be in a room. Hell, I could almost make it sound like an echoplex delay if I manipulated enough on the back end. And it amazed me when you showed me. I mean, we can get into that a bit later, but it's, you mentioned that was a spring unit, and I was just like, wow. I haven't heard one like this.
One thing I discovered is, there's a lot of, I feel like in the recording field and mixing, mastering, a lot of, negative views on spring reverbs. Yeah. They don't almost to a certain degree view it as a professional device like they would a plate reverb and I ran into that, and I was, I'm a guitar player, so I'm like, yeah, spring reverbs,
Totally.
Like I just, it caught me a little bit off guard because I was like, it's just another tool, guys, like, like it's like a carpenter going, I don't like the hex screwdriver, like,
yeah, but there's hex parts that need it.
When it's there, yeah, you're going to need it, and it's an excellent tool. But this is, it's a little bit different. We can get into that a little bit later. I know you wanted to talk about just reverbs in general, maybe even a little bit, brief history of reverb.
No, absolutely. I mean, dating back to when, cathedrals, we could take it back to when, cathedrals were built 500, 600, 700, 800 years ago. I do recall the natural reverb that they would offer. I know my father is a music historian. He'd much more understand and explain this better, but, at the time there were dueling choirs on opposite ends of the church. And it wasn't so much about the arrangement or about the way that the song was to be sung or the hymn was to be performed, but it was the way that it resonated in that room with the dueling, choirs across from each other in this cathedral with 80-foot ceilings. And, the natural reverb is, the first place you can begin with, that allowed engineers to start capturing that and putting it into, obviously today it's become digital algorithms, but back in the day, if you had the opportunity to record in a facility, and there are many out there that we'll review, that if you go in there, there's no need for a reverb unit. The room itself will provide you with that.
And it adds to the performance value. Even back then, when you were talking about the cathedrals, they were performing with that in mind.
Absolutely.
And it changed the performance, obviously for the better,
and it definitely also, there are trends, right, in music. And, we were talking about this the other day, how certain genres of music will allow for a demand in certain types of equipment over a certain period of couple, 3 years, and then maybe 10 years down the road, this equipment comes back because of a new genre has merged or is mixed and matched. And with that becomes obviously different types of reverbs. And those can come into play of the styles of music. So with the natural reverb, you got plate reverb, you got spring reverbs, you got room reverbs, you got digital reverbs. I know I'm missing a lot here. Don't make me break out my list. I'm going to have to break out my list because...
you got rooms, chamber reverb, I'm trying to remember everything you just rattled off right there. But
there was always... So let's talk about actually in the studio environment. My first experience with an actual true reverb, or actually, here, let's take it back even more, a little bit more. The common saying of when people are like echo and reverb, right? The general consumer of music usually gets the two confused, right? You're like, oh, the echo, you mean like when I'm in the gym, that echo? I'm like, well, it's got to be a pretty big gym if you're determining an echo sound, but no, that's a reverb. You're like, reverb? What's that? I'm like, I thought that's what you get in the church. Well, it's the same thing in a gymnasium. It's like a reverb. Or better yet, you ever sing in the shower? That's a reverb, right? If you got a big enough shower, But I believe most people, in fact, everybody hears reverb every day throughout their lives. They just can't necessarily describe it or pinpoint it out. That's one cool thing about that. Kind of rambling here. But for the most part, going back to the studio, my first experience of a real reverb unit was when I was interning, of course, and they pulled out the 480L Lexicon. And I looked at it, and I'm like, that little thing's a reverb unit? I'm like, it's small. It sits right on top of the desk. How convenient is that? But I still am boggled. How's the reverb coming out of that little box? Engineer looks at me and says, you shithead, it's in the rack over here. That's just the remote. And let you know my naivety for that process. But then...
we all got to start somewhere.
Yes, right? So he then turns to me and goes, if you think that blew your mind, he goes, let me show you something else. All right, and this was at Platinum Post. And we're leaving the A room. The A room was a Neve VR60 with flying faders. I love that console. Sounds badass. We walked out of that room. We walked through the little cafeteria room where I made lunch for everybody every day. And then we walked into the video suite. And in the video suite, there is a staircase, a circular, I don't know what's that called, a round staircase that goes up. And we walked into a catwalk above. Now, I don't like heights, but this was doable. It was only about 20 feet up. So we walked over the catwalk and we walked into this room. Maybe, I mean, you had to duck down to get into it. And it was maybe 4 feet wide by about 15
like attic
feet
space.
long. Yeah,
like a crawl space or something.
We walk in this room and we're following the cables, and lo and behold, a plate reverb. A plate reverb, not only a plate reverb, it was the EMT, I believe 140. This thing was freaking huge.
Oh, yeah. They're ginormous.
Huge. I couldn't believe it. And of course, I just got done with all my full set classes. I should have known that shit by now. But no, not until you see it and not until you hear it. Holy cow. Wow. And that to this day has been the only time that I've used that specific reverb unit.
Wow.
Or I've come across, I should say. And and that was 20-something years ago. And I've yet to see one in the nature, in the world out there since.
There's some people I know in the AS fam that they got some plates. They got some EMTs and that. And yeah, I'm still on the lookout for one here. I might put it above our bathroom over here. There's a little open space.
Yes, the resonance.
I'm always thinking about where I could fit a plate anywhere we're at. So,
yo, Siri just started to talk to me. Did you hear that, Tommy? Oh, Tommy, you got to defend us, man.
Against the machines.
It is. How many times you're just sitting here talking and Siri or Alexa, I don't even want to say her name because she'll start asking questions. But yeah, they're listening to us. They really are.
Yeah.
But the reverbs, yeah, back to the, the EMT, you just don't see those anymore.
Oh, well,
and why is that?
Well, they're a pain to make.
True.
Maintain. There's, they're not really shippable freight.
Yeah, then think of that.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I've been I was mentioning I'm looking for
probably
one,
still on a cargo ship if you did order one, by the way.
And I mean, it's like you're sourcing it locally. So I mean, there's some great sources for plate reverbs, and obviously in the California, Los Angeles area, but in eastern,
Far
Florida,
and few in between.
So that's one reason why, the East Coast, some major markets, you'll see some plates, in some great studios, but, they're few and far between, especially nowadays.
And, going back to the discussion of studios, there was a period of time, I believe we're starting to see a resurgence in recording studios. Hallelujah. Because there was a brief period of time in the mid-2000s till probably 2018, maybe even a little earlier in the mid-2000s, that major recording facilities were shutting down.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't the fact that they weren't good or they didn't have the proper equipment or the proper acoustics. There just wasn't work. But ultimately, a lot of facilities closed down. But luckily, because of that, a lot of their equipment got dispersed out. And it is still out in the hands of, good engineers within the marketplace that are still making it happen.
Yeah.
But with these studios gone, though, yeah, the equipment may be in the proper hands, but the room sounds. Are we going to be able to get that Motown sound, that they were able to capture back then? Certain
space, yeah.
Sounds in Memphis, Hitsville, USA.
It was the rooms as much as it was the gear.
Yeah.
So you could disperse the gear, but you can't disperse the room.
Right. And of course the people touching the gear. But again, I think reverbs, there was a time, and I didn't know this too, when reverbs initially were first introduced. It was introduced, I believe, by Hammond, and it was placed inside his organs. He created it for the purpose of to replicate the church. Again, we're kind of getting back to this cathedral sound. It's just nature offers beautiful things if structured right. So he put that within the organs, and audio engineers decided, well, let's put that on vocals. Why not, right? Well, at the time, radio, I don't know the specifics of it, but when it played back on radio, that reverb sounded like shit. All right. I don't know if there was enough bandwidth or what, however, that did not happen. So music in the 30s to 40s, all the vocals are pretty much dry.
Yeah.
There was no reverb on it. And eventually it got into the point where they figured it out. I don't know what they did. Thank God they did, though. And now we have beautiful reverbs.
I'm sure there's someone listening that
is
knows.
Totally pimp slapping me right now.
Yeah.
Saying, dude, listen, break out your history book on this. I get it. All right.
Yeah.
But, it brings us, though, too, where I believe in recent years, as a music producer, I've seen a lack of reverbs being used again. I would say more recently it's come back to life, but in the late
90s,
early 2010s, the 90s, there are these trends where reverbs and other pieces of equipment come and go, but reverb plays such an important element if you know how to properly use them.
Yes.
Too many people will pop it on an aux or probably just pop it on their channel, which I see too many times, which is okay. But they'll put it and just do the mix, wet, blend, and done with the day. Or they'll just go to a factory preset because it says vocal reverb and say, you know what, this is good. It works great. Maybe 1 out of 10 times that'll work. But I would use that as a starting point. But what is it that you feel is different from a hardware reverb unit, even if it's a digital version, like the Rolands used to make? Those are actually pretty cool, than some of the older ones and to the plugins.
Oh, geez. It's hard to quantify. There's some really good plugins, digital reverb plugins in the box,
Capital Chambers one is pretty dope.
I even like Little Plate by Sound Toys is great,
True.
That's a great
Echo
plug.
Boy, I like that.
The Hala,
yes.
That's a great, there's so, I'm sure people,
Well, here, this is more of a question than I should ask then. Is it that people resort to using, and this is probably more of a general overall in plugins. I can remember the days of having to recall a mix session to turn the vocals down 2 dB. Okay? It would take 2 hours to patch everything. It would take that long to recall the faders. If you had automation recall, if you didn't, you had to break out the paper booklet and stencil in everything and recall every outboard piece of gear like that. And you better hope it all is accurately to the way it was a month or 2 months ago when you did that first recall.
Yeah.
So is it a convenience thing?
Well, I feel like
a
lot of digital is obviously convenience, and workflow and, recallability, like you mentioned. But I feel like in the case of reverb itself, it's something that it's used sparingly, number one. So it's a more subtle effect in most cases. So it's not front and center a lot of times. So that's why I feel like a lot of hardware has been coming back and reverbs hasn't come back as strong because of just that basic fact that it's something that's typically used sparingly. But if you really, are leaning into a reverb for that sound, having the best representation of that, whether it's, it applies, to same as having a hardware opto compressor,
right.
A tube compressor. So it's all at the end of the day, it's case by case basis,
Yeah. Exactly. And it's all colors too, right? What type of color are you trying to achieve? But, the XL-305R is pretty badass. It allows you to do a lot. It's very flexible. A lot of times people will put EQ, and I do, there's EQs within the reverb units.
Yeah.
But this EQ, I tell you what, it's, wow. I don't know the correct word. You're just going to have to use it to hear what it does. You punch it was 600 hertz dial is there on there, I believe.
Yep.
And you boost that bad boy up on some of those background vocals. Hear what that will do for you.
You can trim some highs. Boost mids, cut mids, whatever on the wet signal, and that's a great feature. It's also, having parallel wet switches, and then just what it does with the stereo imaging on the reverb signal itself is to me, like, that's like the number one reason, you know, what you hear coming out of that, and the way this particular reverb works on a, you know, mono or stereo signal is something that's a little bit different, you know.
Yeah, the dimension and depth on it is beautiful. It's something you can actually hear, close your eyes, and just grab. You know, you can actually pinpoint to it and grab to it. What do we got down here? What are these bad boys?
Well, you were talking about the Hammond spring reverb, and this is something very similar to that. Theirs are a little bit longer, but it's the same principle. It's usually just one sled, and it's got, you know, usually 3 springs in it. And they're
sled? You can go snowing with that?
A sled's what holds the springs in place.
Gotcha,
it's got a transducer and a pickup on the other side there. And, you know, in this typical spring reverb sled, which is just usually one single sled here, it's got 3 springs. They're all uncut, and they just sort of bounce around there, and they create that boingy spring effect, you know, that we're all kind of used to. You can hear boinging right now, you know, boing. But that's what that is, and so
interesting. This is
more of
little springs in this one here.
This is more kind of creating a chamber out of springs. It's
No, if you can't see, he's holding it looks like 4 sleds.
Yes, this has 4 sleds, 2 sleds per side, left, you know, two sleds for the left, 2 sleds for the right. They each have 3 springs each. So you got 12 springs total, and they're all like cut. So these long springs, like you're holding right there, they're cut to particular lengths, which tunes them to a particular note.
Got you.
So what makes it unique is the spring timings. They're equally tempered, is what they call it, and they follow a log progression very similar to the musical scale.
Now, how tedious is it to get these springs?
Well, the hardest part of this is Wayne did not go easy on me. He made me do the math, and it was all the math that I had in college that I was like, when I was in like business calculus, I was like, man, when am I going to ever use this? And
well,
I got to use it. But so I had to calculate the spring timings, and he wasn't like, here, just cut it to this length. I had to figure it out. He had to, you know, he schooled me basically in how to do that. So then, I figured it out and came back, and he verified, you know, my findings, and we basically hang these in, you know, each position in order in the sled. So you could see these numbers I have written, you know, right here, out, left, 1, 5, and 9. So 1 is like this spring, and it's cut to this particular length. And so these, basically the left to right, it's not like they're mirror image of each other. They're not like the same time. You're not like duplicating the same room. They're like 2 separate rooms or 2 different observation points in the same room.
Very nice.
So if you like press play and press stop real quick on this reverb, and you listen to the decay back, you're hearing 2 different decays, like in the left and right.
In the left and the right. Yes.
It's a really cool, beautiful sound. You know,
and I mean that. And that's beautiful. You know, it's beautiful. And what's nice about that is it's more natural too. You know what I mean? How many times you walk into any room and you're going to have the exact same reference from left to right level in your ears? That's beautiful.
Yeah, 12 springs. They're all their own notes, and they're just tuned together. So when he described this to me, I was like, my mind was blown. And this is just its own chamber type or plate kind of sounding device when used very sparingly. And when you start driving it, you can still kind of get that spring sound too. And what's amazing about it too is the circuit and the way we worked it is you could take a mono input, and it provides this nice wide reverb field. And, and this is all in like a 2-rack unit space too. It's 11 inches deep, but all like it's pretty compact for what you're getting.
And you got some on the YouTube. You'll have some demos coming up of that.
Yep,
I believe so.
Oh yeah.
For everybody interested in hearing how it works, check that out here very soon.
This is definitely a laborious thing, though. Like lots of, cutting your fingers as you're cutting the strings, and it's like
imagine
the ends of guitar strings.
Cuts. Yeah,
it's like that. When you cut the top of your guitar strings and you prick your finger on it. Yeah, it's the worst.
Definitely remember that in the morning. Waking up.
I built a few myself, and I'm grateful that we have, a really skilled assembler who's doing it right now. So I'm grateful.
You have an on-staff surgeon now, so in peace, people get cut up, you can stitch them up, no problem.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. So the reverb unit, I'm glad that has been released. I know people are now wanting to know, are you going to do any more? Because that first batch went pretty quickly.
We're still getting a couple of late stragglers out, and then we're going to start having them in our regular sales. Oh. And the demand is.
You hear that,
crazy.
Peeps? It's going to be a regular item.
Oh yeah.
So let's hear it. The reverb unit, the XL-305R, for all you curious people out there, it will be part of the regular stock at audio-scape.com.
Yes, it will. Check the regular inventory updates through our email.
Yes, so we're on Instagram, and, please keep in mind that inventory is due to supply.
Yeah, well, we build in small batches.
Yes.
So if you see we haven't had something in a while, like Justin was just mentioning, we don't have the materials on hand, or there's a shortage of transformers, or something's going on, but we're working on it.
Believe me.
This is the world we live in nowadays. So
we're going to make it happen somehow, some way. It will be done for you.
Oh, we're making it happen every week,
No doubt. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you, Justin.
I hope you listeners enjoyed this episode, and join us next week as myself, Chris, and Tommy sit down and talk Gear Talk.
Gear Talk.
Hey now. All right, you guys have a good evening.